Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third talk of this academic year's Rural Computing Speaker Series. If you don't know me yet, maybe haven't attended one of our talks before, my name is Gene Hardy, and I am an assistant professor here at Michigan State University in the Department of Media and Information, where I also direct the Rural Computing Research Consortium. First of all, I'd like to thank the Quello Center for Media and Information Policy for their generous sponsorship of this event, especially Ashley Wilson and Johannes Bauer for helping me get the speaker series off on a great foot this year. I will also note for all of those of you out in Zoom land, live transcription has been enabled. If you need it, there should be a little box on the bottom of your screen that has like the closed captioning symbol on it. So you can click that if you would like live transcription. Before I introduce our speaker today, Dr. Brianna Posadas, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the Rural Computing Research Consortium for those of you who haven't attended one of our talks before. The consortium is a group of faculty and students who are interested in advancing research and outreach related to computing in rural communities. We currently have 16 affiliates across 5 colleges at Michigan State University. And we take what we would call like a big tent approach to rural computing. We come from lots of different disciplinary backgrounds and perspectives. And our topics, our affiliates tackle range anywhere from software design to economic development and policy to telehealth, precision agriculture, and beyond. But most of you aren't here today to hear me speak about the consortium. You're here because of our guest speaker, Dr. Brianna Posadas. Dr. Posadas is an assistant professor of integrated technologies in agriculture and human interactions at Virginia Tech. She was previously one of the prestigious Computing Research Association's Computing Innovation Fellows, also at Virginia Tech. And when she completed her PhD at the University of Florida, she was the first Latina to earn a doctorate from the Department of Computer and Information Science and Engineering. Dr. Posadas's research focuses on the intersections of agriculture, technology, and user-centered design. And her research is particularly interested in focusing on issues of usability and accessibility in precision agriculture technology. So Brianna and I go way back, I'll say, not really way back, like 4 years back. We met at a small workshop that I hosted at the Computer Supported Cooperative Work in Social Computing Conference. These computer science conference names are way too long. We met at the conference in 2018 at a workshop that I was hosting on rural computing. We both kind of started our graduate programs, graduated in around the same time from our PhD programs. So we've sort of been at arm's length the past sort of 7 years or so. And it's been great to sort of see Brianna's work from afar. So, of course, we are incredibly excited here today to be hosting Dr. Posadas at MSU. And I'd like to also thank all of you for attending this talk today. With that, I will stop my share. And Brianna, I'll pass it over to you.
Yes. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Jean, for that great introduction. Excited to be here. First talk for me for 2022. So I will get started. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about big data in agriculture and some general like applications and policies and recommendations about addressing some of these issues that have come up with the way that we use data in agriculture in general. It's not going. There it goes. All right. Wait, let me minimize this real quick. All right, cool. So the first thing, I just kind of wanted to take a step back a little bit about like why it's important that we're even using precision agriculture. And one of the things in agriculture research that we talk a lot about is like this 2050 problem, which is the idea that by the year 2050, if we continue to produce food at the rate that we do, the world's population is going to outgrow our food supply. And so one of the bigger challenges in agriculture research is how can we increase the amount of food that we are producing, but also minimizing, our environmental impact, trying to be mindful of our resources, of the inputs, but still also mindful of the fact that we are going to have a larger population and more people that we need to feed. So there are a lot of different approaches to this problem. And one of the ones is precision agriculture. And so precision agriculture can be summarized as applying the right treatment at the right place at the right time. And so it's this idea that you're taking an agricultural field, especially in the US or some of these larger farms, they tend to be all of one crop. and even if it is all of one crop, you're still going to have areas that are going to have different needs. So instead of applying, the fungicide or the herbicide or the fertilizer uniformly across the field, what you want to do is you want to do targeted application so that you're minimizing that input, and you're also reducing the negative environmental impacts for using a lot of the fungicides and herbicides. And you're also saving money by being able to be more targeted and more thoughtful about your applications. And so in order to figure out where to target your applications, you do need to start by evaluating the needs of the field, and then adopting the application inputs to those needs. So in this diagram here, let's see if I can do a pointer. Awesome. All right. So in this example, this is from my master's thesis. So we were trying to create a prescription map for growers in Korea who were dealing with a fungal disease called Marasana blast disease in their Fuji apple tree orchards. So the first thing we did is we went out there, we collected some data. We were looking at using hyperspectral imagery of the different, trying to identify the different stages of the disease in the trees. So these are the different examples of what the leaves would look like. We were able to figure out which spectra, which wavelengths were going to give us that information about the early symptomatic trees. And once we were able to identify that, then we could use that information to create a map. And that map is what we would give then to the growers or the researchers so that they could use that to guide their application of the fungicide. And then after the application, you can start all over collecting more information to make sure that your application actually did work. If you need to do some adoption of the algorithm, or if it works, and then you can just continue using that map to mitigate and to minimize the spread of the disease. All right, I think I did that. All right. So in general, you can save, farmers can save money by doing this. In a study of farmers in North Dakota, it was found that those that were able to adopt precision agriculture technologies could save up to $1,500 a year per farm. So it is it's worthwhile for them to adopt these practices. And so in that example, that was just for one crop and for one disease, but you could really use this to adopt to a lot of different problems out in the farm. There's precision livestock where they've been able to put sensors on animals as well and be able to do targeted inputs there. To create these algorithms, create the software, they take in a lot of other different data besides just the crop data. You can look at weather information. You need to be able to take in the machinery data. If you're going to do like an autonomous vehicle type of application, you need to be able to connect with the equipment that's going out there. And then of course the biological data, you would need that as well to build these softwares. And so if you take it all in together, and we're looking at some of these farms that are now becoming very automated, very connected, it's a lot of information that's being gathered, a lot of information is being centralized. And it's predicted that in 2030, like pretty soon, an average sized farm is going to be able to produce more than 1 million agricultural data points a day. So we're looking at a very large scale of information. And while this data collecting in itself isn't new, farmers have always been collecting data on their own farms. Nobody knows the farm better than they do. What has changed is the amount of information that we can collect, who's collecting it, how it's being processed, and who has access to it. So all of this has kind of created this new system, this new industry, and that's what has also kind of raised a lot of different questions and problems. Right now, a lot of this agricultural data is connected to names, addresses, property location, and crop yield information. 90% of the agricultural data that's collected is tied to GPS, which then can be easily correlated to other personal identifying information like income and profitability, which then I say makes it personal information. It makes the agricultural data is very much personal data. And 77% of American farmers are very concerned about who has access to this information and how it's going to be used. Especially particularly the way that the system is right now, the big players in who is collecting this information are the agricultural technology providers. And here we have an example of some of the different, some of the larger ones in this space. We have John Deere. We have, I guess Monsanto's not really up there, but those are the two big names that always come up in these conversations. And so they are collecting a lot of this information to create the software and products that they then turn around and sell back to the farmers so that they can use it for the on the equipment that they use out into the fields. So they're collecting agricultural data from millions of farms, and sometimes they're doing this without the farmers' explicit consent. A lot of times with these user agreements, John Deere, for example, is always an easy example to use because they're one of the bigger players. They have a turn the key policy in which they say that you don't even have to like pretend to open the user agreement and read it or like skim through it, the way that we always do with when we download a new mobile app or when we download new software onto our computers. And we kind of pretend to scroll through it. For John Deere, you don't even have to open the file. Just by turning the key on the tractor, you are consenting to their user agreement. So you're agreeing to something that you've never seen before. John Deere can ping your tractor and take your information, and you may not be aware that any of that is actually happening. And in this current system, it's not clear, these boundaries between data ownership and control. Farmers then get kind of locked into these user agreements when they're using the software, and farmers have often suffered legal consequences for not following to the terms that they've never read. As these ATPs become more integrated, creating prescription data, machinery, the seeds, and the chemicals, the farmer's choices have become a lot more limited as switching providers becomes cumbersome and oftentimes impossible. You kind of just get stuck with having to use, one company's, all of the resources from one company because they work together, they work well together, and they don't work with other companies' technologies. So farmers then don't really have a choice but to share their data with the ATPs, and only the ATPs have the data analytic platforms to increase the yields to help them remain competitive in the marketplace. So some ways that we can possibly address the privacy and the security of their data. We can look at some of the other regulations in other industries that have had some successes in that. So when we think about what type of our data is actually secure or has some kind of protections, so you think about your healthcare information, and HIPAA covers that. HIPAA covers the diagnoses, treatment information, medical test results, prescription information, national identifying numbers, and demographic information. So a lot of that personal identifying information that the medical industry would have on you, there are certain protections around that. And the same thing in the financial sector, the GLBA covers your personal identifying financial information. And then in the EU, the GDPR covers any information that contains your name, address, photos, IP address, genetic and biometric data. And then in the US, there's also a couple of the states who have brought in which data deserves protection. So California, Massachusetts will cover personal information where the consumer's first name or initial last name are combined with your social security number, driver's license, health insurance, medical, and bank number with access code. But as of right now, none of these industries, the HIPAA and the GLBA is not going to cover agricultural data. The GDPR doesn't really cover agricultural data either, because none of these cover data that is tied to your GPS. And a lot of, as I said before, a lot of the agricultural data is covered to GPS, which can be easily correlated to other personal information. So this whole industry just doesn't have any kind of safety net. Doesn't have any kind of oversight into who can have access to that information and what happens if there's a breach, if there's a data breach of somebody who has who was supposed to be protecting your information and they ultimately don't. So in response to this lack of regulation, the American Farm Bureau Federation and other agricultural groups developed a set of core principles for how these agricultural tech providers should be collecting, using, storing, and transferring the farm agricultural data. So this is kind of like a timeline of the privacy security principles for farm data project. They started in November 13 of 2014. They created these 10 principles, which I'll talk about in the next slide, exactly what those principles were. So 39 companies initially started and they signed off on, yes, we will follow these 10 principles. And then from that set of principles, the Agricultural Data Transparent Project was created. And this is where It's a third-party organization that is comprised of various agricultural stakeholders, including farmer associations and ATPs. And so what they did is they came up with 10 questions that verify whether or not the user agreements that these companies had created reflect the 10 principles, and whether or not their user agreements, the answers to those questions were backed up by the user agreements. And if that all meshed well, then they would receive a seal. And then this seal is something that they could put like on their website, they could put on their documents to indicate that they are in compliance with this transparent project. And since its inception in 2014, only 20 companies have gone through the entire process and have received the seal. And and of those 20 companies, only 6 of the original 39 have gone through the whole process to get the seal. So I'm going to step through those, walk through those steps a little bit. So these are the 10 principles that they had came up with. So to discuss a little bit more, so education is one of the principles. And so for this one, education represents that the grower organizations and industry should work together to develop programs to educate customers of their rights and responsibilities. And then for collection access and control, so that indicates that the ATP should only access farm data if farmers give affirmative and explicit consent. So all of these principles are reflected into the 10 questions that are in the next slide. And to verify the companies are following these core principles, the Ag Data Transparent Project has them answer those 10 questions, which I will show you here. So these are the 10 questions. These are the ones that the companies who want to receive the seal, they need to answer these questions. These are yes or no questions. And the only thing that the answers have to do is to be reflected in their user agreements. So they don't necessarily have to be of benefit to the farmer in general. So for example, for John Deere, just as an easy target, John Deere, for the question, do the ATP's agreements address what happens to my data if the ATP is sold to another company? So their answer is no. Their answer is no, that their user agreements does not address. It doesn't explain to the farmer what would happen if John Deere was suddenly to be bought by another company, what would happen to their data. And because they answer truthfully and their documents support that answer, they have received this seal. So to me, that feels very, doesn't seem to best represent what the seal is supposed to do. So I think the seal is supposed to be representative of like, well, we've been working together, with the growers, with the farmers, to kind of create this, to be upfront about what we're doing with your data. But they're not being explicit about what's going to happen to your data because they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan for the situation and what's going to happen. So in general, those questions I don't think were created in the best way. And then in general, this whole program is absolutely voluntary. There's actually a payment. Companies have to pay to be a part of it and to receive the seal. And there are no consequences for not following through or for not participating. So if you get the seal and then you change your documents and you don't reflect that in your questions, there's not really a consequence for not following through. There's like no follow-up after the first time. Or you can just choose not to participate. You can be in this space and not do this at all. And there are a lot of companies who haven't, and there's no consequences for not participating. And also the stakeholders and the people who came together to create these questions and the principles, they were lawyers. They're not privacy or security experts. So it seemed a lot like the system was created to just cover the larger companies and not necessarily represent the interests of the other stakeholders. And so as far as I know, as of now, there hasn't been any evaluation completed to determine, why is the adoption so low? Why has so few of the original companies who were initially interested in participating, why have they not gone through the whole process? And whether or not this project in general has alleviated any of the concerns that farmers have had about their data usage. So that current solution doesn't exactly address all of the concerns that have come up with using a lot of this information in ag. The big questions that are still up there are of data security, data privacy, and transparency. And so in this next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different proposals and other things that are in motion to try to adjust these and going beyond the current self-regulation type of solution. So the one thing for privacy, there's been a few different recommendations, a few different researchers who have been looking into what are different ways that we can better adjust privacy for all the stakeholders involved. ATPs have been given the privilege of collecting farmer information, and in order for them to continue to have this privilege, ATPs must allow the farmer opportunities to negotiate the rules of boundary maintenance. Right now, farmers believe that ATPs are trying to deceive them with the legalese, and we need to instead inspire trust by writing the privacy policies in clear, direct languages and in a clear, direct language. Both parties need to be able to contribute. If both parties are contributing, we'll be able to increase comprehension and we can raise issues that maybe the ATPs haven't thought of. And this would also help to increase transparency. Because right now, the way that a lot of these privacy policies are written, and not just in agriculture, but a lot in different industries, is from the larger companies and from their own lawyers. So like Instagram, just for an example, Instagram isn't coming to us to figure out, well, what is it that we want out of that partnership. If I download Instagram, how do I want them to be able to access my photos? What kind of things do I expect for them? And then what kind of things do they expect from me? Like we never sat down and had that conversation. But it's something that we could do in agriculture. We could have these companies, these representatives sit down with growers and actually write these privacy policies in a more everyday language, try to avoid all the legalese, and have farmers have an opportunity to even raise these questions, raise their concerns, and have that be reflected in the documents. We need procedures to enforce the privacy policy. Enforcement is usually an afterthought until there's an actual breach. So like Monsanto did suffer a data breach in 2014, and Tyson's Food was caught sharing data without farmers' consent in 2017. But there's nothing set up to for these companies to have any kind of consequences for when they violate the terms of their privacy policy. And it's often always the other way around. If the farmer or a user violates the privacy policies, these companies are very quick to come after the user. But the user doesn't really have a lot of avenues to pursue a company after they have not held up their end of the agreement. So other examples, other ways that we can be better about communicating, what the privacy policy means or what the user agreement means for the user. One is to give farmers like a real-time signal of data collection. So for like the John Deere example, if John Deere is going to ping the tractor to collect information, the farmer would be able to get like some kind of signal from the dashboard that was happening, or they would get like an email summary at the end of the week being like, hey, John Deere pinged the tractor 5 times this week. This is the information that they collected, so that it's a little bit less out of sight, out of mind, and that they're being more informed about what's happening, and they can have hopefully be able to intervene if they suddenly decide, you know what, I don't want John Deere to have all this information. I revoke their ability to take this data from me. So just kind of keep it a little bit more on the forefront to make it more real, as it's happening. And then the last suggestion is, prior to signing the user agreement, the farmer can be given a concrete example of the data that is to be collected. So to use the Instagram example again, so let's say you download Instagram and Instagram has access to your photos. So before you download it, Instagram will be like, oh, you're agreeing to let us have access to your photos, such as this one. And it would pull up, like a random one from your phone. And maybe it's a really embarrassing photo that you don't want them to have access to. But that makes it very more real and concrete, like, oh yeah, Instagram has access to some photos maybe I don't want them to have access to. And so we can do a similar thing in agriculture as well. Before you turn that key, John Deere can show you, you're going to give us access to this data, such as this information. Is it something that you want? So another way that we can make it a little bit more concrete, a little bit more real. And then proposals to address security and just regulation in general. We really need to see changes at the federal level. Right now, federal data privacy and security legislation is needed for the agriculture industry, similar to what we've seen in the healthcare and financial services industry. Currently, the FTC, has the authority to go after companies who do not follow their own privacy policies and deceive consumers and users. So that's something that we could utilize. We could have the FTC be that person who will help users. I'm sorry. To help users make sure that companies are also, upholding their end of these agreements. We need these regulations at the federal level because ATPs operate over several states, and piece-wise regulations are not going to cut it. Having different regulations in California and Massachusetts doesn't really help farmers in Florida or in Virginia. The FTC could also propose a minimum requirement as to what the privacy policies need to be. So not necessarily, dictating that the privacy policies have to be this or that, but just saying they have to be at least at this level, and then let the companies still have that freedom to make even more rigorous standards if they want to. Yeah, and the FTC is the primary regulatory body for privacy and protection practices across all industries. So they're definitely in a position where they could take on this role for agriculture. And then a few proposals to address transparency. And so this kind of comes more from the research area, from what us as researchers, people who are creating these technologies that then ultimately get used by the ATPs and the farmers, how can we be a little bit more responsible, a little bit more transparent about what we're building, and making sure that it's usable and accessible to the ultimate end users. So we could use more of a responsible innovation model, use some of the practices of AI assurance, and also just in general improving researcher industry relations. So for responsible innovation, we need to be able to integrate the ethical societal values and norms from the beginning of technology development, be able to bring in the stakeholders, from the end users and the researchers, and having them, communicate about what actually needs to be built and what is the best way to build it. And when we have everybody come together, then we can think more about what are the long-term ramifications of what we're building, because we're bringing in all these different perspectives, and everybody's going to have something that the other person hasn't really thought of. So for example, Lindblom et al. Looked at data support systems, some of the data support systems that were being deployed for farmers, and they found that they were insufficient in general because they were designed by scientists who used information that they thought was important, but not necessarily what the grower thought was important. So from the scientist's perspective, the system worked great, but once it was actually deployed and the grower was using it and realizing that it wasn't giving them the information that they actually needed. So in that sense, it wasn't very usable. And also that the user interface itself was very poor. It wasn't very intuitive. So they weren't able to really operate it to the same extent that a scientist does, as the scientist who created it did. Because when you're designing something, you often tend to design for yourself and it makes sense to you. But once you deploy it, if the ultimate end user can't understand it to the extent that you do, then it's not that accessible. And Zach's in Kricharik, I think I said that right, also found a similar thing with the development of agroecological monitoring infrastructure. They found that had poor data interpretation, and that was because the infrastructure wasn't well integrated with the tools that the users already had. So it wasn't easy for them to adopt it to their current workflow. And also that the output data presentation wasn't very clear either. So that was leading to poor data interpretation. And a lot of these issues can be alleviated by user-centered design processes and participatory design processes. And so just a quick overview of what that looks like. What I really like about the user-centered design process is that we bring in, when we're designing something, we bring in the users in the very beginning. from when we're formulating the questions, or just even trying to figure out what is the problem, what is the thing that needs to be addressed. And we're not parachuting in with our own solutions to a problem that we perceive. We're actually trying to figure out, well, is this a problem? Or are we interpreting the problem correctly before we even start to make the designs? So my background is in, I started in like traditional engineering, where it's kind of the opposite, where a client will bring in a problem and then we build something and then we have them come at the end to test it. And then the HCI, the user-centered design process, kind of turns that around. Like, no, really from the beginning, we need to have them in here. We need to be doing rapid prototyping so that we can get their feedback more quickly, and solve those little problems as we go along. So by the time we actually have a working prototype that can be deployed, it should be a lot more robust. It should be addressing a lot more of the problems that maybe we didn't see from the very beginning because we were constantly soliciting that feedback. And so a couple of examples of where we've done this in the agricultural context is my PhD dissertation, crowdsourcing ground truth data collection for precision ag using a citizen science mobile application. So if you remember all the way back to the precision agriculture cycle from the data collection, so that is oftentimes done by researchers, and then in the academic field, those researchers tend to be grad students. We have grad students who are out there running around the field collecting this information. And so my idea was like, could we crowdsource that? And could we get citizen scientists to come and do that with us? And so another way to be building that transparency in that process by having the community members come and help us collect data on a project, on a problem that was of interest to them. And so in this case, for this particular project, it was for lambs quarters. They were interested in learning about how lambs quarters was growing in Washington, D.C. And so having them be more involved in this process, building that community and connection with the researchers. So it wasn't so much more of us parachuting in trying to solve a problem. It was us working together to solve a problem. And the other project where we use a participatory design is designing this affordable, flexible robot to aid farmers with mobility limitations. So this is a diagram, a figure diagram of what the exoskeleton will look like. But we are using a participatory design process. We have been interviewing with farmers. We're going to have them come into the lab and test out the exoskeleton and making sure that it is adaptable to their actual workflow, which out in the farm can be very different. There's a lot of different environments that people tend to work in, and we want to make sure that it's adaptable to the actual type of work that they do, and also just the various weather conditions that they are also exposed to. So I guess I have I wasn't sure how much time I had for the videos possibly. Let's see if I can play this one. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so I guess I have some time. So this is the actual mobile application. So when I was designing this, trying to figure out what was the best way for people to be able to give us the data we needed about lambs quarters, we were trying to map out where's lambs quarters growing in DC. And if we end up, creating this map and finding that lambs quarters was growing in, these really particular areas, then the researchers can go out and do a little bit more investigation. But what we needed the to crowdsource the mapping. And so when I first started creating the data collection processes, I first started with the idea that it wasn't going to be an app, that I can't assume that everybody has access to a smartphone. I can't assume people are going to want another single-use app to download. But then through the interviews and communications with the community, they were really into actually having the app. So that's what we did, using a different couple of design iterations. This is what the app ended up becoming. Them being able to input their GPS locations, they're able to input images, either images from their gallery that they've already taken. They can also take the images through the application. This is from my own phone, so the pictures are kind of silly. The time and the date is already automatically populated. And then there were also other questions that they could answer, because we also found out from the community that the level of expertise with plants was varied. There are some people who were very beginner, who didn't know a lot about soil or plants. And there were some people who were master gardeners who did know a lot, and they wanted to be able to share that information with us. So that was also added into the application, ways for them to share that information if they had it. And if they didn't, it wasn't so much a big deal, because we would have the images, and then the experts could then look at the images. And if they saw something interesting, they could always use the map, the GPS, to go back and look at the area more closely. Also in the app was the correct classified images were put together on a map that you could access through the app. So the submissions were verified by an expert before they were put on the map. And then that was information that we then shared back to the assistant scientists. And then this is just the evaluation, and that was part of the dissertation. And I think that should be it for that video. Yeah. And then this next one is about the exoskeleton. And so for that project, we're actually adopting it from another project that the College of Engineering had done at Virginia Tech, where the exoskeleton is being used in Lowe's warehouses for the workers there. And so the problem is now, how do we adopt that to the agricultural industry? As I mentioned before, like it's a lot varied. They're out in various weather conditions. They're indoors, they're outdoors, they're kneeling, they're standing. So it's a lot more variety than what you would see in a warehouse. And so that's the big challenge, is how do we adopt that? And so this is the video we have for the Lowe's project, but it kind of shows you what the exoskeleton would look like in action. If I can get it to play.
Store associates stay
There-
strong
now
and
we
stay
can.
healthy. So we built an exosuit with Virginia Tech to give our store associates superpowers.
When they go to lift those things over and over again, it just creates strain on their bodies. It makes them tired. The suit's going to make them get through their day in an easier manner.
One of our major goals for this was to make it easier to lift heavy objects. We want to avoid injuries and give people more energy while lifting.
The exosuit is the end result or manifestation of a very long and rigorous research project to really make sure that this was going to be the thing that would work.
We've made it as simple as possible. We use textiles as a human interface to make the suit comfortable and conformable, as well as being flexible. We use carbon fiber in the back and the legs so that it can twist and bend with the person. As the person bends, the carbon fiber will store energy, sort of like a bow and arrow, and then when the person stands back up, it returns the energy to them, just like releasing the arrow. The team includes 4 undergraduates and 4 graduate students. They've really taken care of calculations, need finding, prototyping, to making a refined design which we can put in the store.
Our associates are excited about seeing something different. Their reaction is, wow, it's really nice to see the company doing something to help us in a radically different way. And just how cool is that?
It's been wonderful working with Lowe's Innovation Labs because they're trying to dream of what the future could hold. And at Virginia Tech, we're trying to invent the future.
This exosuit is literally the first step. Exosuits of the future will have better form factors, more amazing powers to make this superpower even better.
All right, I got it. Cool. So those are 2 ongoing projects, trying to use user design, participatory design in the agricultural setting. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was using AI assurance or explainable AI to increase this transparency between the researchers. Oh, this isn't the last one. I have another section. Sorry. Second to last one. Using explainable AI. So this idea that if we could be more open about, what is this black box that we are deploying out into the field? When we hand over the software, when we hand over the technologies, are we appropriately explaining what's actually happening? Where the software is taking in all these various inputs and giving predictions or giving recommendations, are we explaining how it's actually making those decisions? And so, right now it's a black box. But if we can better communicate what's actually going on, then we can also help with troubleshooting. If something goes wrong with one of the inputs, if like the software is taking in information from a weather station and the weather station goes offline and it gives out these crazy outputs that the farmer or the end user knows is incorrect, but they can't trace back exactly why, because they don't know how the software is actually operating. So if we can make that a little bit more clear, we can help to solve some of these problems. And so this is just a brief overview of the 10 AI assurance, explainable AI papers that I was able to find, specifically that looked in agriculture. As you can see, the earliest one is from 2017. This is a very, very new area. And a lot of the times when they were building these user interfaces, the people that they were having test, whether or not, the explanation or the visuals made sense, they were testing either with like other computer scientists or like unspecified experts. They would just keep referring to them as an expert, and they weren't specific on an expert in what domain. Or there was one that was that worked specifically with policymakers, with federal analysis and agricultural researchers. But in general, not necessarily always the person who's would most benefit from having something like this. So this is an example of one of the user interfaces. So this one is AHMOSE, augmented by human model selection. So this is a visual support system that allows the domain experts to better understand, diagnose, and compare different regression models, primarily by enriching model agnostic explanations with domain knowledge. The system was validated for grape quality prediction. The system enables users to diagnose and select prediction models that perform the best. So on the side here, in box A, are the controls that can select the use case, the intervals, models, and features to be visualized. In the middle, in B, we have the scatter plots that highlight the comparisons between the model's predictions, which are the dots, and the domain expert's knowledge, which is the green rectangles. And then on the right in C are the charts that indicate the importance of each feature according to the given model, and how much is there an agreement between the prediction and the expert knowledge, so that we have the expert, looking at this interface, and they can visualize, how well the model matches up with what they know. And so this way they're able to actually choose which model to even use as they're moving forward. So giving them a little bit more agency and being a little bit more transparent about like what's going on in the software that we're deploying. So this is a new area. This is where I'm hoping to move my research agenda, in my new lab, and having my students work on how can we build these user interfaces that can best communicate what's happening, help people to make better decisions out in the agricultural field. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight a few different recommendations for just in general improving researcher industry relations, using if we're going to move forward with using the XI systems, what are the questions and things that we need to keep in mind so that they are actually robust and actually addressing the problems that we had. Keeping in mind things like, does the XII tool clearly identify its target audience and their expectations for the tool? So who are the end users? There are going to be a lot of different stakeholders who might be interested in a system. And are we being clear? Are we showing them, or are the different stakeholders going to be able to get the information that they need from the same tool? Is the presentation of explanation sufficient for the target audience to gain insight and to improve upon their model? And does the XI tool provide a variety of types of explanations? So once again, keeping in mind that there's a lot of different stakeholders, and can we be a little bit more robust? Can we present the information in different ways that could help different people make the decisions that they need to from the software? XI for agricultural end users, we need the systems to be able to help users understand the AI's capability and be transparent about data and privacy. Recognize that many of these recommendations are high stakes and need to leverage existing trusted resources. So one of the reasons why we tend to mistrust some of these softwares is because computer scientists have tended to be to oversell the promise of these of the software, try to oversell it, saying that it can do a lot of things that maybe it can't really do. And when it doesn't live up to its expectations, the person who suffers the consequence is the farmer and not necessarily the computer programmer who created the software. And so being a little bit more mindful of that, this is, profit margins are very thin in agriculture. We can't exaggerate what we can and can't do with the technology. We need to be more realistic when we talk about it. and using trusted resources on the ground, working with extension agents, working with other people who have better communication, better understanding of what's happening down on the ground, to make sure that what we are offering is even needed or is even helpful. And also just trying to be more farmer-centered when we're creating our AI assurance systems, being aware of common hardware and data constraints, being aware that we are working with communities of different literacies and multiple languages, and ultimately just trying to do a lot more co-design with the smallholder farmers and other intermediaries. Yeah, so that is, in a nutshell, some of the different overview of the landscape of the way that big data is used in agriculture, some of the issues that have arisen, and some of the different ways that we are trying to address it, trying to address privacy, security, and transparency, trying to reframe how privacy policies are even created, federal regulations that are desperately needed, and trying to just be more farmer-centric in the ways that we build these technologies. Okay. And that is all I have for you today.